To get the best outcome from whatever I've taught you in this particular course on how to make the best use of your frequency separation, please avoid the following mistakes. Number one, using the wrong radius. Like I said, at the point of separation, we are going to put in a radius. And this particular radius is going to determine what part of the image remains in the color and what part of the image goes to the texture. So even if we do our separation nicely, our mixing nicely, our cloning nicely, and nice editing of color and lighting after you are done, as long as the radius that we use was not right for that particular image, whatever we are going to be doing after that is a waste of effort and time. Okay, so we need to ensure that for every image that we separate, we are going to be very intentional and accurate about the radius of choice for our separation. And that is why at the beginning of the course I took time to dedicate a whole video to the choice of the radius and what guides the size of the radius that we pick for each separation. So whenever you're doing your separation, even if you're going to be using actions, always ensure that for the right composition you use the right radius. Otherwise you're going to mess up whatever you're going to be doing that separation after that, and that is going to be guaranteed. Number two, wrong mixer brush settings. So whenever you're going to be using your mixer brush, ensure that you have it, number one, transparent, no color. Number two, ensure that the value of the weight and the load are nicely set in, because if you have too much weight and too much load, you're going to have a difficult time getting a good outcome. And the same applies if you have too little weight or too little load. And lastly and most importantly, make sure that you use a soft brush with the hardness of 0. Okay, so that's the second mistake to avoid, using the wrong mixer brush settings, whereby you have a color in your brush or too much weight or too much load or too little of that, or the brush is too hard. Okay, so then the other one is working on the wrong layer. Okay, once you do a separation, you're going to get to a color layer and a texture layer. On the color layer, we mix using the mixer brush. On the texture layer, we clone using the clone stamp. Okay, and remember, we work on the backup layer. So for example, when we are going to be mixing the color, we will not mix on the color layer, we are going to mix on the color copy layer. When you're going to be cloning the texture, we will not clone on the texture layer, we're going to clone on the texture copy layer. So this order of layers and what comes on top of the other can never be interchanged. The texture is always going to be on top of the color, and that can never be interchanged and cannot be reversed in any way. Okay, then after that, another mistake to avoid is mixing too much, because if you mix too much, you're going to end up killing your color properties and killing your dimensions. So you need to ensure that whatever amount of mixing you're doing to your image is just enough. Okay, because we said the essence of the mixing is not to destroy the image and end up the image looking very plasticish and very unpleasant. What we need to do is we need to make use of the mixing to get a nice clean image that is free of bumpiness. So once the bumpiness is gone, we stop mixing, because if you continue mixing after that, we are going to mess up the dimensions of our image, and our faces might end up looking very flat and etc and etc. So that is the fourth mistake to avoid, which is mixing too much. And in the same measure, that brings us to the fifth mistake to avoid, and that is mixing too little, because if you do not mix enough, you're going to leave a lot of blemishes and bumpiness in the photo. And the essence of us mixing was to use the separation layers to remove the bumpiness and the roughness in the skin. So if you do not mix enough, you're going to leave a lot of that bumpiness in the skin, and therefore that means that whatever separation you did is going to be almost useless, because the use of it is getting a nicely cleaned color layer, and that can only be done by mixing enough. Okay, so like we said in the previous mistake, do not mix too much, but in this in the current mistake, do not mix too little. So just have a balance between too much and too little, and have the right amount of mixing where it is just enough. So then the sixth mistake to avoid is mixing non-skin areas, whereby apart from when you're using FS to do things like background cleanup and things like that, as long as you're using FS for screen cleanup, mixing should only be limited to skin areas. Okay, so if you're editing my photo, you're only mixing the skin not the eyelashes, not the beard, the upcoming beard, not the afro and things like that. We only mix on areas of the skin. But as compared to the mixer brush, we can clone on areas that do not have skin. For example, if maybe I have a piece of blanket on my hair which is white, you can use the clone stamp to remove the texture part of it, then use another tool, for example the patch tool, to remove the color part of it. But do not mix on non-skin areas apart from when using a face to clean your backdrops. Okay, the mixing is only limited to the skin. Do not mix on the lips, do not mix on the eyes, do not mix on the eyelashes, on the eyebrows, or any area of hair. Okay, then after that, another mistake to avoid is working on the wrong zoom level, because in the course of doing your editing, you're going to be zooming your image in and out a lot. Okay, and in the course of as you zoom in and out, the amount of image that you see is going to be changing. So if you are zoomed in too much like that, you cannot see effectively what you're doing and what area of the skin you're working on. If you are zoomed out too much like that, you cannot see what you're mixing. Okay, so you need to maintain a good balance, a good amount of zoom, and the guiding principle is zoom in and out depending on the area that you're working on. Ensure that at any given time you can see the area you're working on and a good amount of area around it. Okay, so we mostly zoom to around what percentage is this, to around 60-70, where you can a bit see the face in at least quarters. Okay, I can see a quarter of the face, another quarter of the face, then I can see another quarter of the face and another quarter of the face. So that is the right amount of zoom. Then after that, another mistake to avoid is mixing color with the texture layer on. We said at the point of us mixing color, we need to have the texture off, because if you have the texture layer on like that, you cannot accurately tell what area of the image is in the color and what area of the image is in the texture layer. So you might end up overdoing the mixing of the color layer, trying to fix an issue that is in the texture layer. Does it make sense? I hope it does. So what you need to do is ensure that whenever you're working on the color layer, the texture layer is off. So this way, we are sure that whatever we can see now at this particular point is the color layer of our image, and everything that needs to be fixed in the color layer minus the texture. But remember, to the point of us now working on the texture, we are going to turn on the color layer, because the color layer will already have been fixed, and we are going to be sure that whatever problems we have remaining on the image are now on the texture layer. Okay, that is the other mistake to avoid, which is mixing the color layer with the texture layer on. So then mistake number 9 to avoid is dragging the mixer brush. Like we said, the mixer brush is very destructive. Okay, so if you do long strokes with the mixer brush, it is going to drag color like that. You see what is happening? It is going to ruin your image completely. So the golden rule of the mixer brush is do not drag. Like we said, what we're supposed to do is we do small circular strokes around the blemish you are removing. So if I'm trying to remove this, I'm going to come here, then do small circular strokes like that. Small circular strokes, small circular strokes, small circular strokes. Then the last one, the last mistake to avoid is cloning texture too far apart. Like we said, the texture layer of our image is the hide frequency layer, because the texture is changing a lot. So what we need to do, we need to clone a good texture right next to where we want to replace it. We cannot pick a texture from down here, then bring it up here. It's going to look different, you see. So because the texture is changing a lot, we also need to sample a lot. Like I said in the lesson about cloning the texture layer, you're going to be, for every bit of texture that you're going to be removing, we need to clone a new. So come right next to what you're removing, sample, then remove it. Right next to it, sample, remove it. Right next to it, sample, remove it. Do not sample. Video, we make an action for your separation, and you're going to be done with the course. How amazing! Thank you for following so far, and so far so good. See you around.